Line now is Mukesh Kapila, former Director for Emergency Response at the WHO, and now Professor Emeritus of Global Health and Humanitarian Affairs at the University of Manchester in the UK. Welcome, Professor. There's a lot to understand here. It's a complicated issue. Can I simplify it down to this being a power struggle between two former allies?
Ultimately, yes, but there are power struggles and there are power struggles. The problem here is an incomplete history of federalism in Ethiopia. So, as you know, there's a federal state. There are many groups in Ethiopia, and the constitution is about balancing them in a federal structure. And the problem is that this is contested at all levels. And now no one can dispute, I think, that it is good for security for all military groups to come together in a national security force. But whether politics should come first rather than security, or whether security has to happen first before we get proper inclusive politics, is a matter of debate here. And then, of course, there's very little trust because of the Tigray war and other conflicts. There's very little trust between the regions of Ethiopia and the federal government in Addis Ababa. So it's not a simple story, but it all leads to the same point of mutual mistrust.
I mean, the easy thing to understand is that there's conflict. What do you think the Fano militia realistically is trying to come away with here? What's their goal? Is it as bold as to overthrow the government?
That's what Addis is worried about. However, the evidence for that is not particularly strong. And, it'll take a lot to overthrow the government in Addis. But certainly the Amhara militia, the Fano, are definitely concerned that if they disarm or they get co-opted into the federal forces, they will be vulnerable. For example, to the neighbors in Tigray, with whom they had a vicious conflict when they were backers of the federal forces only recently, and also they're very wary about what would happen to their status as well as their territory. There is a border dispute going on between Amhara and Tigray, for example, and it's a combination of all those factors that are at play here.
We're seeing unrest breaking out in several countries across Africa at the moment, neighbouring Sudan, obviously, bordering them. Also in Egypt, there's now violent internal conflicts erupting. Are they connected? Is this unrest spreading across the region or just coincidence?
An extremely good question. I think there are some countries have factors in common, meaning similar or the same actors involved, especially if there are terrorist groups or mercenaries involved, including the Wagner group in some countries. But elsewhere, the issues are not similarity of actors, but similarity of factors. So, for example, there is mistrust between peripheries and the center. There's a question of disenfranchisement of regional groups, and you see this in Sudan, for example, and the same is very true in Ethiopia. And then, of course, in the case of Ethiopia, you have the perennial problem of Eritrea, so with its interference across the border. So this band of instability that now runs from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, including coups and including other insecurities, I think is extremely worrying. And the problem is it's a bit like an infectious disease. Once something starts spreading, it then spreads all over. And I'm afraid this is what we're seeing now. So I think Ethiopia was already part of a regional conflicts, and what's going on within Ethiopia now has further potential to make the regional situation worse. What that means is we need a regional approach. I think trying to deal with Sudan's problems on its own, or Ethiopia's issues on its own, or Egypt's or anyone else, or the other countries in the Sahel are not going to work on their own. It needs a kind of concerted and combined approach.
Mukesh, really appreciate your time and analysis. Mukesh Kapila, my guest, former Director for Emergency Response at the WHO.